Every January, people set goals based on trends, wishful thinking, or what everyone else is doing. That's why so many of you feel stuck by March. But this year, I want you to take a different approach. You're going to set goals that fit your work, your capacity, and the reality that you are operating in. Let's get into what realistic goals look like for 2026 and how you can build a year that moves you forward. Welcome back to Control Your Career. I'm Julia Toothacre, your strategic career consultant and owner of Ride the Tide Collective. I help ambitious professionals take control of their career with clarity and intention. Every so often, I do a bonus episode in between seasons, and this is going to be a good one for the start of 2026. This bonus episode is going to give you practical guidance for the year ahead so that you can make decisions that actually support the career that you are building. Today, we're taking a realistic look at goals for 2026 and what progress looks like when you cut out the noise and focus on what matters. Let's get into it. So first, we want to figure out, what do realistic goals actually look like in 2026? And I'm going to say the market's been a little crazy in 2025. But even with the market being a little bit different, when I really was digging into the data, it's not that much different than previous years, obviously not in the 2020 and beyond, but previous to that. And so it's really interesting to really dig into some of the data and understand what is going on. So if you have not looked at bls.gov and looked at the JOLT survey, I highly recommend you do that if you're into numbers and if you're kind of geeky like that. It'll help you understand the numbers now and why you keep hearing people say that things are okay. Because in comparison to previous years, and I went back and looked in like the early 2000s, mid 2000s, it's actually not that much different. It's actually better in some cases. And so I think that's what's been so hard. There's this disconnect between what the numbers say and then the lived experience of everyone. But there are some things that we can be really honest about when it comes to this market. There is slow growth, but there is still some steady growth. There is higher unemployment this in 2025 than there was previously. So that's going to play a big role going into 2026. There are much longer hiring timelines. This is something that I've seen just through hearing it from different people and anecdotes, and even from certain recruiters. Some of these hiring timelines are really long. And I will say a lot of that has to do with hiring managers, not necessarily the recruiters. Recruiters are trying to push everybody through, but a lot of times the leadership and the hiring managers are having a hard time either finding time in their schedule or just making a decision. Employers can be really selective right now. It's an employer market. You've heard me say that before if you've been listening to the podcast. And that basically means that employers have the pick, and that makes it really competitive for professionals. And that makes it also very frustrating. Something else I'm seeing too amongst my clients is bigger moves are harder to make. So if you want to do a complete career change, that is proving to be a little bit more difficult in this market because there is so much competition within multiple sectors. Now, it's important to note that it's not like that everywhere. Some of you listening to this might say, I could get a job tomorrow if I wanted to. Well, that is true for some areas, for some professions, depending on your level. So a lot of these are going to be generalizations, but for your specific situation, it's going to look a little bit different. So you need to be aware of that. So when we think about setting realistic goals within our career, we have to take the market into account, because if our goals are about us moving into a different position, whether that's internally or externally, we have to understand what is going on. So definitely make sure that you have a pulse on the market within your field specifically. So obviously we have the broader market, but that's going to be a little bit more general. You want to dig into the data and the information for your sector to understand what's going on. Because, like I said, not everybody is going to be impacted. And so you have to understand what that looks like for you. So, when it comes to realistic goals, what I'm talking about are goals that really align with who you are. And so they fit your current role, they fit your capacity, they fit the visibility that you have. And it's really a natural progression for you, whatever that might look like. It's going to align with opportunities. So if it's an internal position, it's going to align with opportunities that your company has available. I think it's important to understand your skill set when it comes to realistic goal setting. So you need to be really aware of the skills that you bring to the table and what you're ready for. A lot of people say that they want to go into management, but they're not ready. They haven't really had any experiences that build a case for them to go into management. And so what are those realistic goals going to look like for you? I think what's really important here when we're talking about realistic goals, and I love that word, realistic, it's not the big goals, okay? And it's not these like fantasies that we have when we're sitting at our desk going, I wish it was more like this. I think that there is a place for that, and I think that we should have that. But if we're talking about right now, I want to ground everybody. I want to make sure that we are looking at goals in a really practical way. It does not mean you can't have the big goals. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Like, you can have the big goals, but right now we want to focus more on those, I would say, easier wins or more tangible goals that we can control. So what happens a lot, and what I hear people talk about, is having these goals that really are not realistic because a lot of times they are dependent on somebody else. And so this might sound like, I should get promoted this year because it's time. I need a new job because I'm bored. We talked about that in a previous episode. I'm going to switch industries because I'm bored in the industry that I'm in, but I'm not going to do anything to prepare to switch industries. And again, like I said, right now, it's going to be really hard to do those big moves. I'll just reskill into AI. I've been hearing that a lot. And then that'll get me a higher paying role. Well, we don't really know what's going on with AI. So doing a complete overhaul of your career into AI might not be the best answer. And then there are goals that sound really tangible. So something like, I want to be a director by Q3. It sounds like a good goal, right? Like, it's measurable, it's timely, for the most part, you understand the steps that are going to go into it, but is there a position that's going to be available? Is that an option for you? Does your company offer that? Do you have a connection somewhere where there's going to be an opening? So there's still a lot of factors that have to do with other people when it comes to that goal. I'm not saying it's a bad goal, but we want to really stick to the goals that we know we can accomplish because it's within our control. So what does that look like? So a realistic goal might look like strengthening cross-functional relationships. This is especially important if you want to go for an internal position or a promotion. You want to make sure that you have buy-in across the organization. You might want to improve your communication skills or your influence skills. We've talked about that in previous episodes in the last season. There's a couple episodes specifically on that. Increasing visibility, right? That's on you to get into the rooms that you can, to talk to the people that, have influence within the organization. Taking on an extra project that might stretch you a little bit or allow you to build up some skills that maybe you feel like you are lacking. If you do want to leave your position, getting really clear on what that next position is going to be. So what is the title that you're looking for? What type of organization do you want to be in? Really figuring out what that looks like and being clear so that you know what you're going for. Okay. And then figuring out skills. What skills do you have? Where do you need to progress? Where do we need to put a little bit more education in order to grow those professional skills? And then potentially looking at habits. Do you have some habits that you need to break or build? And what is that? And how does it connect to the future you? Now, I know that these sound really basic for some of you, and some of you are going to go, oh, I could get that done in Q1. That's great. This is what I'm talking about. This is what we want right now, especially for, I think, my more high achieving clients. A lot of these things they'll get done in Q1, Q2. Great. Then you move on to the next thing. But what I'm trying to get across here is we need to build these smaller, more realistic goals right now, just because we don't quite know what's going on in the market. Now, does that mean you can't go out and apply for jobs? No, you absolutely can. But understand that the lead time for that is long. And so we don't know how long it's going to take you to find a position. And so investing your time in some of these smaller goals is going to help you in terms of giving you some of those wins early on versus getting frustrated looking for a position and not getting where you want to be. Okay. So does that mean you shouldn't have big goals? No. I'm going to repeat that multiple times because some of you are going to say, but I want to do this. Awesome. I love that. That's the big goal. But what are the smaller goals that we need to get there? And let's focus on those right now. Okay. Because a lot of times those bigger goals, especially when it has to do with a promotion or a new position, they have variables that are outside of your control. Okay. That relies on somebody else, a hiring manager, a situation, how people perceive you. And so we want to get into a space where you can actually have more control over the goals. Okay. I think the big goals too can lead to burnout. They can lead to disappointment. In some cases, you might be comparing yourself to other people within the organization or even friends within your circle, and that becomes really hard to do. And so again, we want to keep everything manageable. When we have a market that's a little wonky, where we don't quite know what's going to happen day to day, and things happen that will change situations very quickly, especially with how organizations are doing layoffs right now, which is wild. These really small wins can help us move forward better. They just can create more opportunities for us. They can make us more visible. And that really just helps build our confidence and make us feel better. I think it's important to note that realistic goals are really about action. They are action that you can take, that you can control, where you're not necessarily relying on somebody else in order to make that goal happen. Okay. So I want you to think about this prompt as you are going through this process of building out what goals are going to work best for you. What goal actually reflects the year that you are going into, not the year that you wish that you were going into? I think that's really important right now, again, to stay grounded and to stay realistic. Another way to look at this is, where can you create real movement within the influence that you already have? So how can we build on what you already have versus trying to start everything over? I think that's a trap that I hear, especially a lot of career coaches get into, is, we got to make these big plans and we really have to, like, go big or go home and make these really big shifts and changes. Most people can't do that. That's going to be too much. So what can we do that's realistic, that's going to move us forward? And you can have a couple of those. And once you finish one, you go on to the next. Like I said, some of those high achievers, you're going to get things done within Q1, and then you can move on to the next goal. All right, so as we're thinking about what these goals might look like, we want to keep some things in mind. So I did kind of a high level overview of what that could look like, but let's dig in a little bit deeper to some things that you should be aware of. So think about stability. How stable is your current role and company? Right now, with the market that we're in, companies are making crazy decisions, all right? And so you have to understand what your company is doing, what they are trying to do. So when you are looking at your particular goals, make sure you're taking a look at the organization. What have they been doing? What actions have they been taking? Not just what they're saying, not just what they're putting out in the nice company-wide email, but what are the actual actions? Have they been doing layoffs, and why? Has the result been? Have you seen a lot of org chart changes? This usually indicates that there's not going to be any stability, and you want to understand what that's going to look like for you. How's the budget? Do you have budget? Are you being cut back? What does that look like? Is there a lot of leadership turnover? Are priorities shifting? Have there been different freezes in terms of headcount and hiring? What is truly going on behind the scenes? Now, some of you can answer that because of the positions that you're in. Others of you might have a harder time understanding that just because you're not privy to certain conversations. But these are also great things to talk to your manager about to get an idea of how they're feeling and what they're seeing. I think especially if you get these really, elaborate emails where they're talking about vision and what's going on. If you're getting those a lot, I think that's a great conversation to have with your manager or even coworkers around what does this really mean and what does this look like? So you want to understand the stability of your company because that's going to play into what goals are going to work best for you. If your company is unstable, then your goals might not need to be internal. We might need to be looking externally for goals or usurping whatever you can out of the company until you get to a situation where you do have to make a decision or that decision is made for you. So if we think about how to set up goals based on the stability of the company, here's what I want you to keep in mind. If you have a stable organizational environment, you're going to want to grow skills, look at visibility, think about promotions, have those conversations because it's stable. It's a stable environment and you should be able to have those conversations. If it's an unstable environment, which unfortunately I think is many people right now, you want to document any wins that you have had. Try to do some internal networking because you never know, you might be able to go to another part of the company, especially if it's a larger organization. And then your goals might want to be a little bit more focused on the job search. So getting that resume tightened up, figuring out what that next role might look like for you. If you are not sure, if you're in a situation where you're not quite sure what's going on with the organization, you can't really tell and you don't feel safe asking, then just be flexible with those goals. So you might have a mixture of goals that allow for internal mobility, but then also goals that might, be more job search oriented just in case. So one of the things that I want you to think about also as you're building these goals is what do you want more of in your work next year? I think it's important to understand what we really enjoy in our work. And sometimes we pass it off and we just go, oh, this is a thing I do. This is a thing I do. But what do you really, really enjoy? One of the things that I'm seeing with clients and just out in the world is people are less focused on titles these days. They're really focused more on the work, and just the dynamics of the organization and the team and whatever the pay is. Now, sometimes the title is connected to the pay, but you never know. So you definitely want to look at what are the tasks that you really enjoyed? What are the relationships that you have in your organization that you've enjoyed, or go into, your past? What relationships did you enjoy and why? What are some of the outcomes that you've had in the last couple of years, and how might that inform more of the work that you want to do moving forward? So I want you to think about what do you want more of and what do you want less of? So maybe you want more autonomy in your position. Maybe you want more strategic work, more creative problem solving, but then you want less administrative overload. I know that was always an issue for me when I was working. I hated all the admin tasks, even though you have to do them. I wanted an environment that was less reactive. I know I lived in that, so that's something that I would consider as well. And then also maybe less ambiguity. So you want to get more clear on what's going on within the organization. So if you were to build a goal around that, it might be to be more open with communication with your manager and learn to ask better questions so that you can get clarity in your position. All right. Okay, we're going through a lot of different areas with this episode, so hang with me because I want to make sure that you're building really good goals for this year. And some of you might be like, I don't want to build goals, but chances are, if that's how you feel, you're not listening to this episode, so it's totally fine. All right. The next area I want to look at is skills. The reason that I want to look at skills is because I think we have a lot of narratives around skills right now. There is a big push for AI. I know I have talked about AI. I understand the push for it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but we have to understand what actually makes sense for our position and in our career in the long term. Okay. So, one of the things that you need to understand about skills is just because it's something that is trendy and everybody is talking about does not mean it's the best skill or the best strategy for you and your career. So, make sure that you are evaluating yourself and your skill set in a way that allows you to go, okay, yes, I can see where I might need help in this area. I can see where this would be a good skill to have if I'm going to move up into X position within the next couple of years. All right. So skills that you probably want to pay attention to and skills that are on a lot of lists that I see. Communication is always a good one. Collaboration, adaptability. I think AI, but not AI in that you need to be building things or running things, but I think just having a basic understanding of AI and how you can incorporate it in your day-to-day work in an authentic way, I think that's where we want to put our time and energy with AI skill building. Decision making is always a good one, especially if you're in management or want to go into management or continue higher. And then cross-functional influence or just influence in general. So how do you build influence in your organization? I think that's something that most people would benefit from as a skill to really put some energy into. So when we're thinking about skills, choose one, maybe two that you really want to build. I would choose a hard skill and a soft skill. I think that's a really good mix to make sure that you're getting like the best of both worlds. And then make sure whatever you decide to do, it's measurable. It's something that you can actually use within your job and you can practice. So when we talk about making it measurable, that could be, taking a course, watching videos, reading a book. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. You don't have to go get another degree. Okay. It's not about that. It can be very simple, but just make sure that you're outlining what that could look like for you. All right. And then I want to leave you with the skill section, asking yourself, what skill would make your job easier if you leveled it up this year? And secondary to that, what skill is missing that you need to be able to get to the next level in your career, whatever that might look like? All right, let's go on to visibility. This is something that I've been talking about a lot the last year in 2025. This is something that I think is really underrated when it comes to professionals. They don't think about it a lot, and then they get upset when somebody gets the promotion over them because that person was just more visible. Now, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're connected in the right way, but that connection is still visibility. And so you want to make sure that you are making yourself visible within your organization in a way that makes sense. So what does that look like? What does visibility mean? Well, it's being known for something. Now, it's important to note that what you want to be known for and what you are known for might be two different things. So make sure that you can define that for yourself. You want to be seen by decision makers. I think that's really the core component of this is you want to catch somebody's attention to make sure that they ask you to be in the room or they ask you to be part of a project. And really, you have visibility when you are trusted. And so when an opportunity arises within the organization, you want somebody to say, oh, I want this person on my team because I know that I can trust them and I know that they have this skill set. So that's what visibility is really about. So what can you do to build that visibility in 2026? Well, first you can share small wins, not just with your manager, but with people on your team, with people outside of your team. Any chance that you have to slip in a small win into a conversation is really going to help with that visibility. Contributing in meetings, so many of us sit back. I know I did this at different parts of my career because I was afraid to speak up. I assumed that my voice was not going to be valid in the rooms that I was in. And in reality, I had things to contribute. And once I started doing that, it helped build visibility for me. You want to build cross-team trust. So this is being able to go onto other teams and work with them and have them trust you. That helps with visibility because you never know who's going to be talking about you outside of, the rooms that you are in. Learning to ask really good questions. I think this helps, especially um, in a meeting environment, right? Where maybe you're not quite sure how to contribute. I think being able to ask really good questions is a great way to contribute. And then also, when it comes to leadership, you want to make sure that you're giving updates that are really clear. And sometimes that's being aware of the communication style of the leader and communicating things in a way that works for them. I've had leaders that want bullet points that have just a few words. They don't want paragraphs of information. It doesn't mean you can't have that, attached to an email or whatnot, but they want the short version. They want to know what they want to know. And so understanding that communication is really going to help you moving forward. So what are some things that block your visibility? Staying quiet. That's always going to block visibility. Overvaluing humility. This is really hard for some people because you don't want to have an ego or you see what ego looks like and you don't want that. The problem is you overcorrect and then, you're being too quiet and now we're not building any visibility. So you have to find that balance for yourself. You avoid conflict. Sometimes we've got to step up and we need to say something and we need to say something in a group in front of people, obviously in a professional way, but that helps with that visibility when you can speak up for yourself or even speak up for others. And then so many people are waiting to be discovered. They think if I just do really good work, somebody's going to notice. They're not. You have to tell them. You have to tell them. And that's where I see a lot of people get blocked on visibility. So if visibility is an issue for you, then this is something that I really want you to think about focusing on for 2026. It's a really good goal to have for most professionals and for the most part is within your control. All right. Okay. So what if we're feeling stuck? What if we feel stuck in our career? What does that look like? Okay. So first of all, feeling stuck is very normal. I do have some episodes related to feeling stuck where I go a little bit deeper with it, but just understand that this is not an uncommon feeling to have. And especially at the beginning of the year, it's not uncommon to feel that way either. But it doesn't mean that you have to leave the position. And so I think a lot of people will feel stuck and then their goal will be, I need to get out of here. And that's not always the best thing to do. So I want you to think about different options when you are feeling stuck. I want you to think about broadening your responsibilities. What are some things that you could take on that might stretch you, right? That might be a new goal, a new skill that you would want to learn. So think about that, broadening responsibilities. Possibly restructuring your workload. This is a little bit more involved, but it can help to just mix things up. So have that conversation with your manager about how you can make some changes when it comes to the workload, if that's an option. As for stretch opportunities, this is always something that I encourage professionals to be doing on the regular. You want something that is maybe in an area that you want to grow into, or just something that you don't know about that you want to learn about. And that really helps you mix things up a little bit and see if you want to do something different. This is a really undervalued strategy, but pairing up with somebody who is really strong in an area that you're not as strong in, and kind of coming together and doing like a best of both worlds type of thing. I think that can be really great, especially on a project. I know I had a coworker where we had very different strengths, but we valued each other's strengths. And so when we worked together, we understood where everybody fit, and it made us a really great team. And it was something that I think kept me from feeling stuck in the position, because I had somebody that I could really rely on, and I didn't feel like I had to do everything myself. Now, not everybody's going to be in that position, but if you can do that, I think it's a great way just to help you learn from somebody else and possibly get out of whatever funk you might be in. And then, thinking about what your stuckness actually is, and if it's something that you can fix more immediately. So is it the environment? Is it your manager? Is it the workflow? Do you have a skills gap? Do you have a confidence gap? That happens quite often when we get stuck. We just don't feel ready for whatever we are doing. So you want to ask yourself, what would make my current position feel meaningful again? But remember, if you're stuck, it's not uncommon to be stuck, and building some really strong goals around that are going to be really helpful for you. So let's talk about what to do if you're unemployed. So I know so many people have been unemployed, or they just found themselves unemployed at the end of the year, which is the absolute worst situation that you can be in. And I can't believe that companies are doing it, but here we are. So if you're unemployed, what do those goals look like? I mean, the ultimate goal is to find another job. Totally get that. But that can also get very overwhelming. So that's going to be the big goal. But what are some of our smaller goals that are going into that, right? Well, first, we have to really acknowledge what is happening emotionally. What is your emotional reality being unemployed, whether it's been for a couple of weeks or months, in some cases, a couple of years, unfortunately, for some people. So you're going to have fatigue. You're going to go through that, especially if you're in the multi-months process. There's going to be a lot of pressure. You're going to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to get a job immediately, right? Because finances, bills, all of those things. Also, your confidence is going to take a dive. Even if the layoff had absolutely nothing to do with you, which most of them are like that, your confidence still takes a nosedive, because you still will say to yourself, well, couldn't I have done something different? Or why wasn't I the one that they kept? And so it just can absolutely wreck your confidence. Okay. So I want you to be very real about that, because if you don't understand what you're feeling, if you don't understand just the pressure that you're feeling around unemployment, it's going to make it really hard for you to move forward. All right. So what can we focus on? What are some of the goals that we can have if we are unemployed? First, have a really clear job target. So many people are throwing so much out there that that's part of the reason why you're getting rejected. I'm not saying it's the only reason, but it can potentially be a reason. So get very, very clear on what you want to apply for. Make sure that you are networking. I know some of you are going to be like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It does work. It doesn't always work, but it does work. And the best thing that you can do, especially if you are recently unemployed, is start talking to people and start getting your name out there again. All right. Make sure that you're managing your energy. So, think about how many applications you're putting out, the time it takes, the energy that it takes. There are some people that will say, I apply to 30 jobs a day. Well, I mean, okay, do you have to do that? It seems like a lot. So what does that mean to you in terms of energy, and how is it making you feel? And then also think about, how do we rebuild confidence? That's going to look different for everyone. So I'm not going to go in depth with that, but I want you to think about that for yourself. What do you need to help build that confidence back up? That's likely not work related, because you're going through the process of trying to find a job. So it's likely going to come from another source so that you can build that confidence again. Okay. One of the things that I want you to think about are micro goals when it comes to being unemployed, because a lot of times we feel like, I do have to apply to 30 jobs a day. What am I doing if I'm not applying to 30 jobs a day? I want you to think about this. One connection a day. Reach out to one person. Make one connection. One tailored resume. Okay, so maybe you have a couple different job titles you're going for. Pick a day and revise a resume to fit that job title, that job group. All right. What is a measurable milestone? So that might be, I'm going to apply to 10 jobs this week. Notice I did not say 30 a day. 10 jobs this week. That's 2 a day on average. It doesn't seem like a lot, but if the positions are good positions, then it's going to move the needle. I will also add, if you are in this process, try to apply to positions that have opened in the last 24 hours. If they've been open for a few weeks, might not be worth your time. So try to be early in the application process for that. All right. I talked about the big dream goals and how we're probably not going to focus on that. There's too much going on right now, and it doesn't mean that you can't have them, but we have to keep everything manageable. So I want you to think about the big goals in terms of your longer term career strategy. So that's something that we're going to get to eventually. But I want you to then think of, what are the things that I actually need to be doing within the next couple of months that are going to help get me to that bigger goal. And so these are going to be your smaller steps and your smaller goals. I know that people define these things differently, but this is how I am defining it. Okay. So we're just going to go with it. So I want you to think about your dream goals, even if it's just to get a new position. Those are the vision. That's going to set the vision for you. But all these kind of micro goals that we're talking about throughout this episode, that's going to help us get there. That's building the case. That's giving us what we need to get to that dream, whatever it's going to look like. Okay. So once you have figured out what those goals are going to be, and I've given you a lot of different options of where you can go with that in this episode, you want to make sure that you are taking action. Action is going to happen day to day, week to week, month to month. So I want you to think about, what are your habits? What is your check-in process for yourself? So what are your weekly things? What are your monthly check-ins? What are your quarterly milestones? Anytime that you can identify that, depending on the goal that you have, is going to be helpful, because it's going to allow you to track the actions that you are taking. So what are we tracking? Well, it depends on the goal. So I'm going to leave that to you to figure out, depending on the goal that you have. But a lot of times it's going to be, I did the thing, I got this win, I made this connection. That's going to be a really great way to keep track of what you are doing. Honestly, I recommend having a notebook, because I like to write things down, but whatever method works for you to keep track of these things is going to be helpful for you in the long run. Okay. Okay. We're almost done. We're almost done. I want you to think about derailment. This happens so much. We set these big goals in January and then we get derailed by March, right? Because we haven't set the right goals. So here's what I want you to think about as you're going into goal setting and into Q1. I want you to think about the potential internal blockers that you might have. Are you overcommitting to something, right? Some of us are going to build these elaborate plans and it's going to be too much and we're not going to be able to do it. So whatever plan that you make, I want you to share it with somebody. And then I want you to take a step back and go, is this too much? And then pull things off and keep it on like a parking lot list for yourself. Avoidance. We set the goal and then we don't do it. We avoid it, right? Fear of being seen. This is going to come with the visibility conversation. We're just not ready. We have this fear of being perceived. And maybe that's the thing you have to work through first, right? Before we actually set some of those other goals. Perfectionism. This is not about being perfect. This is about making progress. I know that that is going to be so hard for some of you, but it's something that you have to keep in mind. It's not about being perfect. It's about moving forward, about making that progress to the goal so that we can get to the bigger dream and the bigger vision. Old narratives that are inside of our heads that we're holding on to. We have to let those go. We have to recognize them and then we have to let them go. So be very aware of that. What are some external things that can happen in this market? This is what you need to be really aware of. Leadership changes is always going to be one of the big ones, especially if it's a direct leadership change to you. Any budget cuts are going to be a huge impact to things that you're trying to do internally, and any kind of team instability, whether that's, layoffs, like part of your team was laid off, or there's just a lot going on within the team that's not healthy. That's going to also be hard because you're going to have to manage your emotions and things through that to be able to do some of these goals. So how can we stay grounded through all of this if we feel like there's going to be different blockers for us, which everybody's going to have some kind of blocker. You just have to figure out what it is. Stay aware, be really aware of what's going on with you personally, internally, and then what's going on externally. Be able to adjust quickly. So if something happens externally in your organization, how do you need to shift those goals in order to make it happen, right? Keep documenting wins. I can't express that enough. Keep writing them down. And then keep building relationships. You want to have those relationships ready before you actually need them because you never really know. All right. We went through a lot in this episode, but it's because I want to make sure that you are choosing goals that work for you. That's why I'm not giving you the goals. You have to figure out what is going to work for your situation. So we talked about a lot of different scenarios and a lot of different options depending on where you're at. So hopefully through that, you've been able to identify something. If you've gotten to the end of this and you're like, Julia, too much, what is going on? I understand, I get it. But that's why my content is different, because I'm not just handing you the answer. You have to figure out what works for you. That's what makes it custom. That's what makes it realistic, right? But if it has been overwhelming and you're looking for a little bit more direction, here are some simple goals that you could start with that most people will benefit from. One is getting clear on what you want in your career and what you want in your current position. 2, strengthening communication in whatever way. There's lots of different, ways we communicate. So figure out what you need and set that goal. Improving visibility. That's always going to be helpful for everybody. And then 4, setting boundaries that protect your capacity. If you do not know how to set boundaries within work and life, this is definitely a great goal for you to figure out, and it will help you in the long run. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me on this special bonus episode to really lead us into 2026. I do have some free content that I think is helpful for this episode, so I will leave it in the blog post so that you can access that. One is going to be my values assessment that I think is really helpful in trying to get clearer on what you want. The other is actually a goal setting document that I think is really helpful for the beginning of the year as well. So thank you so much. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody that you think would benefit from it. And please don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, keep controlling your career.